us go deeper into the different types of qualitative research studies. What are the different types of qualitative research designs? It is worth noting that qualitative research has different types, namely narrative research, phenomenological research, case studies, ethnography, and grounded theory. Narrative research is the study of the life experiences of an individual as told to the researcher or found in documents and archival material. An important aspect of some narrative research is that the participant recalls one or more special events in his or her life. The researcher in narrative research describes the setting or context within which the epiphany occurred. Lastly, the researcher is actively present during the study and openly acknowledges that his or her report is an interpretation of the participants' experiences. Different forms of narrative research exist. A biographical study is a form of narrative study in which the researcher writes and records the experiences of another person's life. Autobiography is written and recorded by the individuals who are the subject of the study. A life history portrays an individual's entire life, while a personal experience story is a narrative study of an individual's personal experiences found in single or multiple episodes, private situations, or communal folklore. An oral history consists of gathering personal reflections of events and their causes and effects from one individual or several individuals. Narrative research is not easy to do for a number of reasons. The researcher must collect an extensive amount of information about his or her participant. The researcher must have a clear understanding of the historical period within which the participant lived in order to position the participant accurately within that period. The researcher needs a sharp eye to uncover the various aspects of the participant's life. And the researcher needs to be reflective about his or her own personal and political background, which may shape how the participant's story is told and understood. In sum, the authors of narrative research focus on a single individual, often describe special or important events in the individual's life, place the individual within a historical context, and try to place themselves in the research by acknowledging that the research is their interpretation of the participant's life. Now we will discuss phenomenological research. A researcher undertaking phenomenological study investigates various reactions to or perceptions of a particular phenomenon. The researcher hopes to gain some insight into the world of his or her participants and to describe their perceptions and reactions. Data are usually collected through in-depth interviewing. The researcher then attempts to identify and describe aspects of each individual's perceptions and reactions to his or her experience in some detail. Phenomenologists generally assume that there is some commonality to how human beings perceive and interpret similar experiences. They seek to identify, understand, and describe these commonalities. This commonality of perception is referred to as the essential characteristics of the experience. It is the essential structure of a phenomenon that the researchers want to identify and describe. They do so by studying multiple perceptions of the phenomenon as experienced by different people, and by then trying to determine what is common to these perceptions and reactions. This searching for the essence of an experience is the defining characteristic of phenomenological research. Researchers might explore the experiences of African American students in a predominantly white high school. The other topic is special education teachers who teach deaf and hard of hearing learners during synchronous online class. Like narrative research, phenomenological studies are not easy to do. The researcher must get the participants in a phenomenological study to relive in their minds the experiences they have had. Often, a number of tape-recorded interview sessions are necessary. Once the interview process is completed, the researcher must search through each participant's statements for those that are especially relevant. The researcher then clusters these statements into themes, those aspects of the participants' experiences that they had in common. In sum, researchers who conduct phenomenological studies search for the essential structure of a single phenomenon by in-depth interviewing a number of individuals who have experienced the phenomenon. The researcher extracts what he or she considers to be relevant statements from each participant's description of the phenomenon and then clusters these statements into themes. The researcher then integrates these themes into a narrative description of the phenomenon. Now let us proceed to the next type of qualitative research, the case study. The study of cases has been around for some time. Students in medicine, law, business, and the social sciences often study cases as part of their training. What case study researchers have in common is that they call the objects of their research cases, and they focus their research on the study of such cases. The case studies of Piaget and Vygotsky, for example, have contributed much to our understanding of cognitive and moral development. A case comprises just one individual, classroom, school, or program. Typical case is a student who has trouble learning to read, a social studies classroom, a private school, or a national curriculum project. For some researchers, a case is not just an individual or situation that can easily be identified. It may be an event like a campus celebration, an activity or an ongoing process like student teaching. Sometimes, much can be learned from studying just one individual, one classroom, one school, or one school district. For example, there are some students who learn a second language rather easily. In hopes of gaining insight into why this is the case, one such student could be observed on a regular basis to see if there is any noticeable patterns or regularities in the student's behavior. The student, as well as his or her teachers, counselors, parents, and friends, might also be interviewed in depth. A similar series of observations and interviews might be conducted with a student who finds learning another language very difficult. As much information as possible would be collected. The hope here is that through the study of a somewhat unique individual, insights can be gained that will suggest ways to help other language students. 3 types of case studies: intrinsic, instrumental, and multiple or collective case studies. In an intrinsic case study, the researcher is primarily interested in understanding a specific individual or situation. The researcher describes in detail the particulars of the case in order to shed some light on what is going on. Thus, a researcher might study a particular student in order to find out why that student is having trouble learning to read. Another researcher might want to understand how a school's student council operates. A third might wish to determine how effectively or whether an after-school detention program is working. All 3 of these examples involve the study of a single case. The researcher's goal in each instance is to understand the case in all its parts, including inner workings. Intrinsic case studies are often used in exploratory research when researchers seek to learn about some little-known phenomenon by studying it in depth. In an instrumental case study, on the other hand, a researcher is interested in understanding something more than just a particular case. The researcher is interested in studying the particular case only as a means to some larger goal. The researcher might study how Mrs. Brown teaches phonics, for example, in order to learn something about phonics as a method or about the teaching of reading in general. The researcher's goal in such studies is more global and less focused on the particular individual, event, program, or school being studied. Researchers who conduct such studies are more interested in drawing conclusions that apply beyond a particular case than they are in conclusions that apply to just one specific case. Third, there is the multiple or collective case study, in which researcher studies multiple cases at the same time as part of one overall study. For example, a researcher might choose several cases to study because he or she is interested in the effects of mainstreaming children with disabilities into regular classrooms, instead of studying the results of such mainstreaming in just a single classroom. The researcher studies its impact in a number of different classrooms. This time, we will going to discuss ethnographic research. Ethnographic research is, in many respects, the most complex of all research methods. A variety of approaches are used in an attempt to obtain as holistic a picture as possible of a particular society, group, institution, setting, or situation. Ethnography involves studying a particular cultural group in order to get a clear understanding of their belief systems and practices. Ethnography also aims to have more in-depth understanding of the organizational setup and lifestyle of the members of the group. It is also worth noting that ethnography falls under the field of anthropology. The emphasis in ethnographic research is on documenting or portraying the everyday experiences of individuals by observing and interviewing them and the relevant others. The key tools, in fact, in all ethnographic studies are in-depth interviewing and continual ongoing participant observation of a situation. Researchers try to capture as much of what is going on as they can, the whole picture, so to speak. It involves establishing rapport in a new community, learning to act so that people go about their business as usual when you show up, and removing yourself every day from cultural immersion so you can intellectualize what you've learned, put it into perspective, and write about it convincingly. Ethnographic procedures require three things: a detailed description of the culture sharing group being studied, an analysis of this group in terms of perceived themes or perspectives, and then some interpretation of the group by the researcher as to meanings and generalizations about the social life of human beings in general. The final product is a holistic cultural portrait of the group, a pulling together by the researcher of everything he or she has learned about the group in all its complexity. Here are some titles of studies that ethnographers have conducted in education: Inside High School, The Student's Perspective, and The Manobo Tribe, Then and Now, an ethnography by Abraham L. Masendo. Let us now proceed to the last type of qualitative research, the grounded theory. In a grounded theory study, the researchers intend to generate a theory that is grounded in data from participants who have experienced the process. Grounded theories are not generated before a study begins. but are formed inductively from the data that are collected during the study itself. In other words, researchers start with the data they have collected and then develop generalizations after they look at the data. Researchers doing a grounded theory study use what is called the constant comparative method. There is a continual interplay between the researcher, the data, and the theory that is being developed. Potential categories for grouping items of data are created, tried out, and discarded until a fit between theory and data is achieved. The data in a grounded theory study are collected primarily through one-on-one interviews, focus group interviews, and participant observation by the researchers. But it is an ongoing process. Data are collected and analyzed, a theory is suggested, more data are collected, the theory is revised, then more data are collected, the theory is further developed, clarified, revised, and the process continues. Let us consider a hypothetical example of a grounded research study. Suppose that a researcher is interested in how principals try to maintain and enhance morale among teachers in their schools. The researcher conducts a series of in-depth interviews with a number of principals in a few large urban high schools. Suppose the researcher finds that these principals utilize a variety of strategies to keep morale high, including having frequent one-on-one praise sessions to reward good teaching, acknowledging the efforts of teachers through written or oral commendations at faculty meetings, writing supportive letters and placing them in the teacher's personal files, providing extra resources, and more. In addition, the researcher not only observes how the principals interact with their faculties and listen to what they have to say, but also interviews some of their teachers and continually examines and thinks about the data collected through interviews and observations. Gradually, the researcher develops a theory about what effective principals do to maintain and enhance morale among their teachers. The theory is then modified over time as the researcher observes and interviews even more principals and teachers. The point to stress here is that the researcher does not go in with a theory ahead of time. Rather, the researcher develops a theory out of the data that are collected. Thank you very much for listening to our pre-recorded video report. See you next time. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.